With the Odyssey releasing this week, I thought I'd do a ranking of Christopher Nolan's movies. This is the last picture with Rahim Khan, and borrowing a line from that guy who does all of those uh, Dune, what's it called, insider takes. I've seen all of Christopher Nolan's movies, so you don't have to. Something along those lines. Okay, right. This list is going to be potentially blasphemous to some because I'm going to, of course, I'm going to start off with the worst movies and then make it towards the very best. And I think my pick for the worst movies in his oeuvre will, of course, rankle many, but we'll get to that in a second. Christopher Nolan is interesting because I remember being introduced to him, not personally, of course, but to his films way back in the early 2000s when I saw Memento for the first time. And of course, for anyone who has seen that movie, I mean, it was something, a very, very different take on, of course, the crime thriller. But it was just, it was honestly mind blowing at the time because, sort of, this is something that he's been um, playing with, toying with throughout his career, sort of like, the I wouldn't say it's the imperfect narrative, and I don't mean to say that that's sort of like, the use of that word is refers to its quality or any way. But I mean, it's sort of a non-linear, way of storytelling that he has applied to almost all of his movies. And I think Memento is the best example of it, simply because, well, no, I will sing its praises when I actually rank it. But I'm just saying that sort of my very first sort of brush with Nolan came with Memento. And then, thankfully, back in those days, a friend had come from abroad and he brought with himself a DVD of Following. This is, of course, Nolan's very first movie, and was very lucky to see that. Then, of course, you followed it up with Batman Begins, Prestige, and here we are now on his 12th movie, which is coming out this week. Of course, I've already spoken about the Odyssey, and you can catch that video when it came to the casting and people being up in arms regarding a lot of the creative choices that Nolan made for this. And of course, we're going to see it. It's his first um, foray into mythology slash, well, if you want to call it fantasy, sure. He hasn't tackled this genre before, so interesting to see that. But then also interesting to see what he brings to the table after, of course, that sort of career high of Oppenheimer. Okay. Other than that, of course, he is a man after my own heart. He doesn't possess a smartphone and he loves Earl Grey. So hard to fault an Englishman like that. Okay. Without further ado, let us do this. Of course, we're ranking 11 of his movies. So we're counting down. And I'm going to bunch these three together. And that is, of course, his Batman trilogy. And for me, they are at the very they're at the fag end of his filmography of this ranking. So holding the positions from 11 to 9 are, of course, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises, and The Dark Knight Returns. Whatever. I don't even remember the actual titles. I know, and I'm sure many of you are just switching off right now. You're like, who is this loon? He has no right to be saying. Maybe he has a right to say that about Batman Begins, right? But not about what's it called, The Dark Knight, or the third movie. But I have to say that all three of these did nothing for me. A, as films, but B, as sort of the modern takes on Batman. I've argued this for many years now. I mean, the very first one came out in 2005. So it's been 20 years now. And I remember even back then, um, while there were certain things that I liked about most of the trilogy, especially the casting, right? I mean, Christian Bale as Batman Bruce Wayne, Liam Neeson, for example, as Ra's al Ghul, Tom Hardy as Bane, of course, Heath Ledger as Joker, Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow, Michael Caine as Alfred, um, what's it called? God damn it, what's his name? Harvey Dent's that actor's name. Aaron Eckhart. These were all, I mean, the casting was fantastic. A lot of the set pieces in the movie. Forget the first one, but in The Dark Knight, for example, the whole Hong Kong one, the Skyhook, wow, right? Then in what's it called? The Dark Knight Rises. Was it Returns? What's it called? The whole midair plane hijacking by Bane. Then, I mean, I love the accent. I love what Tom Hardy did. But just Bane as a character, that whole fight scene with Batman. Um, Moments in these movies that I will admit I enjoy watching. But as much as fanboys, and maybe even, for example, cinephiles may argue the fact, there's just something about these movies that are cold, that are lifeless, that are, and I understand that again, this is Nolan's take on Batman, this is Nolan's superhero verse. Um, there's just something about them that I feel are so bereft of what makes a superhero movie that I think that the realism, which I think was the intention there, kind of robs the movie of that make believe that we've come to expect of a superhero movie. I mean, sue me, but there's just something about these movies that I couldn't connect with at all. And I know The Dark Knight is ranked amongst one of the great movies of all time, um, for a number of reasons. But I fundamentally felt that Nolan did not understand who Bruce Wayne Batman was. This is, of course, a struggle for many a filmmaker. I think that the only time that they've ever nailed the characterization is in the animated series. So I think there was that. I think that a lot of the times, that whole stupid, almost insufferable love story or subplot with Rachel, I didn't buy that shit. Nobody bought that shit. And just stuff like that just really didn't work for me. The action didn't work for me. I mean, like a lot of the hand-to-hand fight scenes did not work for me at all. Because Nolan, let's admit it, until Tenet, could not shoot fight scene. He just can't do it. I mean, remember in Batman Begins when Batman kind of Old Town or wherever it is that the sticks or whatever those places is called, when he sort of, you know, drops into the middle of, all of those Lego Shadow ninjas and he fights. And it's so poorly done. You can't see anything. You can barely see anything. You can just see like, a shadow moving and this, that, and the other happening. But other than that, nothing. So there's a lot that I have against these movies. And I know, again, many of you out there will disagree with me and, think that they are at least, if not the definitive Batman movies, but are worthy at least of being ranked among them. I mean, sort of after, for example, the initial ones by Tim Burton and all of the other sort of takes. But sorry, didn't do it for me at all. Next up. Next up is another one, and this is from again early in his career. And this is number 9 to 11, yeah, number 8, and that is of course Insomnia. Again, I remember seeing this earlier on, um, and I can admit freely that I do not think that I have seen it in a good 15, 16 years. Like I don't remember I don't think I've seen it at least in a decade or more than a decade. But while it had a pretty decent cast with Robin Williams and, of course, Al Pacino, there's just something about this movie that I feel, while we saw oodles of talent on display in Following and Memento, in this movie, maybe I don't know. I mean, this was his, I'm not saying his first big budget movie or his first, like, for example, foray into Hollywood. But I think that maybe he was being far more cautious with what he could do, um, with a film like this and with actors like that. And thus, he played it very safe. I don't remember anything about that movie standing out, honestly, other than, for example, Al Pacino's like leather jacket. Other than that, I just don't remember anything memorable. And I know that you guys may disagree with me and say, my God, how could you sort of put following, oh, sorry, not following, Insomnia at a higher ranking than the Batman movies? I just, I mean, sort of, I would have bunched them together, but I mean, being completely, separate films, I couldn't. And so, for example, these movies, I think, at least for me, I mean, sort of, may God give him a long life, but I mean, whenever this man's eulogy is written and maybe I'm reading it out, I don't think I would like to mention these movies. But I am going to mention, of course, the next one. And that is, of course, Following. Following is something that fascinated me because, of course, it deals with the concept of a flaneur, the French, from the French, people. It's just this concept of urban life where you take to. I mean, sort of, we often do this at sort of cafes and restaurants and other public places where we kind of like, sort of observe and sort of like, look at what people are doing, but then to sort of take that to another sort of, I wouldn't say an extreme, but to take that up even further and sort of follow them and see what they're up to and, do so in a manner that's kind of intrusive, but also sort of without being seen. I just was fascinated by it. And I'm forgetting, I think, was this Edgar Allan Poe's story on, dealing with flaneurs? I'm forgetting. I need to, it's slipping my mind right now. But just that very concept, then sort of applied here in what's, let's be very frank, a student film. This is his very first movie, cobbled together, I mean, sort of by asking people for like, to donate and all of that stuff and just getting, you know, non-professional, like, sort of actors and whatnot and doing all of that. Thought it was a very accomplished movie. It was a bold one because it's your first film, you're doing it in black and white. You're dealing with a concept that again is, I would say, niche. I mean, it's not like sort of a typical cops and robbers type film. This is something that starts out as one thing, turns out to be completely something else. And this movie gave us a hint of what to expect from Nolan because he's very good at sort of these misdirections. At The Pledge, if you get the reference, he's very good at these things. And I think that in being sort of this neat, nifty thriller with a high concept, like it's high concept in the sense that it's smart, right? It really is sort of penned from a mind that sort of is trying to take, and I mean, sort of the guy was an English lit major. I mean, taking something that works very well sort of on the page and bringing it to this, into this film, birthing it. Um, yeah, I don't think I've yet to see a movie that sort of deals with the concept, of a flaneur and has done it better. So absolutely love following. I'm ranking this movie here because again, this is A film that again, Oscar did it. I think it won him his first Oscar, right? Let's just quickly check that. It definitely got Killian Murphy an Oscar. But did he get? I mean, he was Oppenheimer. Let me just quickly check that. Release date overview, whatever. J wrote it. Oppenheimer film. Come on. Release accolades. Okay, here we go. Blah 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 blah. On 13 nominations, one Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor. So I mean, this is while Dunkirk got an. I wouldn't say was it equal? No, it didn't get. I think that got 8 nominations. This got 13. But I mean, yeah. I mean, this is sort of the crown jewel, right? This is sort of a culmination of of a 20-year journey for Nolan. Um, in that after producing these, sort of one blockbuster after another, he finally turns to because the Academy is never going to award a movie like Inception, right, or Tenet the Oscar. So it's makes sense that for a movie, for a story like this that deals with a historical figure, deals with a historical event, right? That I think finally he was able to get, of course, take the statue home, take the award home. But I think, and this is, of course, no reflection on the subject matter, but I still, as a piece of filmmaking, I think that yes, this is one of his most accomplished, right? He is aided by a stellar cast. Killian Murphy and RDJ do a fantastic job in their respective roles. He is aided by a very interesting story because, again, we've often heard about sort of like, Ro- uh, you know, uh, Robert Oppenheimer. We've often heard about what's it called, um, the creation of the atomic bomb and what's it called, Los Alamos, and all of the things surrounding it. But sort of as a, I wouldn't call it like a definitive story. I don't think we've ever gotten it, even though there was a fantastic, what's it called, TV movie with Michael Strater, is that his, whatever, in which he plays Oppenheimer. That one was pretty good too. Okay, so, I mean, in this movie, we have Nolan perhaps at the very best of his creative arts, right? We have everyone in this ensemble working perhaps, and it's firing on all cylinders. But one thing, and this is not the only reason why I'm ranking it sort of so low, if you will, but it was one reason that kind of made me walk out of that cinema, not of course while at the end of it, and wonder why it wasn't addressed. For example, how we are spend almost 2.5 hours with this man struggling with ambition and demons and this genie that he's about to release, and yet at no point do we, besides what's it called, that one image or vision, if you will, of a charred human body, do we see the effects or the results of all of this genius. And that is, of course, the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was something that was left out of the script for some bizarre reason. I never understood it. Right. Number one. Number two, I often think that a film's greatness, if you will, largely, wait, largely, but to an extent, re- relies on its rewatchability, right? Do I return to Oppenheimer the way I return to The Prestige or The Tenet? Oh, The Tenet, sorry, my bad. The Prestige or Tenet? I do not. I mean, I think I've seen a film like Interstellar far more times than I have Oppenheimer. And it's not because, again, the subject matter is dry or the film isn't compelling enough. It's just that there's something about the film that I feel is a little, and this is something again that I find in Nolan's works, that they tend to be anesthetized. They lack heart. They lack this human warmth. And I don't know where this comes from. I mean, on the one hand, we see this extreme, almost saccharine sort of emotionality in a film like Interstellar. But in these movies, like I just mentioned, like in Batman, in Oppenheimer, he's far too restrained. That human sort of emotion is lacking. There's just something about it that I found cold. There was just something that I just couldn't connect to with this movie. Um, and that's why I feel that sort of in ranking it, while technically, um, creatively, the film should rank higher. I think for the very reason that I just mentioned, for me at least, because again, this is my list, I'm placing it sort of, further up in the ranks, nowhere close to the good stuff. Okay, next, Interstellar. Interstellar, I feel is, and I've spoken about this movie before when I spoke about sort of the best saving humanity type movies. Pardon me. Interstellar is a movie that I remember at first blush, I did not like. I felt that it was very derivative of science fiction that came before it. It was a mismatch of a lot of the books that I had read, a lot of the movies I had seen, and there was just something about its central message. How sort of love transcends the very forces um, of the universe of reality, of physics. That was something that I just found very hokey and kind of cliche. Um, but in later years, I think I came to appreciate certain elements of it. But as a film, I thought that if you wanted to make a film that was, for want of a better phrase, popular science fiction, Interstellar, it is it. Because I remember at the time, it had a lot of sort of cultural, I wouldn't say resonance, but I mean sort of currency. Because everyone and their aunt was going on about, oh my God, what's it called, Interstellar, and like, oh, there's this whole concept of like, the bulk and stuff like that. People who weren't sort of like your armchair physicists. These were just like random ass people on Facebook who read like, a couple of articles explaining the science behind, what's it called, Interstellar, and going on about it, how they had suddenly become experts in the field. And it was just ridiculous. I just found that like sort of, whenever these movies achieve this, especially when it comes to science fiction, whenever these movies achieve this cultural value where everyone starts accepting it, I suddenly become very wary and start to hate it. And that's exactly what I felt like about Interstellar for the longest time. It was only, I think, in later years that I felt that there were certain things I loved about it, like the robots, can't mess with tars. No way. I loved certain scenes, like for example the docking scene at the end. Um, you know, but that's just it, right? It's sort of me liking scenes as opposed to liking the entire movie. And for me, it just didn't work. There was technical issues that I didn't like about the movie, like the sound design, didn't like that. The script written with his brother Jonathan Nolan, and I think kind of passed on by Spielberg, it was just it was, as I said, popular sci-fi. And I didn't like that about the movie. Technically, of course, you can't fault it. What I did, I mentioned that. But I mean, there were just things about it that, again, while were signature Nolan, the non-linear narrative, all of those things, Um, it didn't work for me. And though I'm placing it before, ahead of films like Oppenheimer, I still felt that the redeeming qualities it had, at least in my mind, mark it slightly higher than the movies I've mentioned it before. And yeah, call me a sucker for like sort of these modular robots, but you can't beat Tars, man. I love that character. I love the entire concept of those robots. So, yep, for me, Interstellar can firmly be placed there. Okay, now of course we come to the top five, right? And at five, I'm going to place Memento. Um, I remember watching Memento because it was mentioned at the time, sort of the internet being and our lack of access to it. We would often sort of get mentions of this in like sort of Wizard, which was this comics magazine. It was about comics and stuff like that. And, they were talking about how great this movie was. Then, of course, I love Guy Pearce, and he was in it. Carrie Ann Moss was in it. That dude, Joe Pantoliano, was in it. I was like, okay, man, these are guys I love from The Matrix. I've always liked Guy Pearce. Let's give this one a whirl. And yeah, it delivered. It just, it is rare for me to have an experience with a movie where I walk away and I was like, how the fuck did he do that? And that's exactly what Memento was for. I mean, besides all of like, the cool factor about it, I mean, here's this guy, he has like sort of amnesia. The only way he's trying to solve his wife's murder, the only way he can figure it out is by tattooing himself. And then, of course, along the way, we realize, spoilers ahead, he was the one who killed his wife, poor thing, because of, course, his amnesia. And he gets played along the way. But this sort of windy serpentine story. And it just, I mean, it really demonstrated, for me at least, and I think that in this list, it is perhaps his best written film. Just because the script is so original, but then also so exceedingly well done. I mean, to keep track of that narrative and to make it make sense, but then for it to also kind of tie up together in this very neat bow at the end. I think the guy deserved the career that he has gotten, because the thing is that if you were a Hollywood exec at the time and you saw this guy, I mean, for want of a better word, an indie film that turns out to be something like Memento, you'd be like, yes, we need this man making, given a free reign, give him money, but then also like sort of tackling stuff, like for example, Batman. Let's give this guy a go. So yeah, that is why I think that sort of Memento deserves to be ranked a lot higher than other movies, because it was the start of let's be honest, a glorious career, right? And we are all the better for it. Cinema is better for it. Number four, Inception. I would have loved, okay, I was struggling between this and Tenet and where to place them. But then, as this is my list, I feel strongly, a lot more strongly about Tenet than I do of Inception, even though I still remember walking out of the cinema. And I remember it was a lovely summer day. This was back in England. And I kind of looked and it was this beautiful sunset. And I just was like, wow, these are the kind of movies I want to watch. These are the kind of movies I want to make. Sorry, this is the kind of movie I want to watch, and this is the kind of movie I want to make. Because that's exactly what Inception was to me. It was this glorious idea, which a lot of people say was kind of lifted from that Japanese film called Paprika. But even if you don't see that, I mean, sort of setting a heist film within a person's dreamscape is something that this man was able to take high concept science fiction and marry it with the blockbuster to give us what essentially was maybe the start of popular science fiction, as I just phrased it. But in this, at least, he didn't, I would say, succumb in any way to, I think, maybe an audience demand, maybe an Interstellar. Not to say that that was how he wrote it, and he kept that in mind. But I mean, in this, you can clearly tell that this is Nolan. You know, it is Nolan presenting the film the way he wants to. This is there are no studio execs involved, no producers telling him what to do. He is like, I don't give a shit if my audience can keep track of the story, if they find it confusing. Because again, you often hear this sort of in these postscripts, um, where after a film has failed, the director or the screenwriter is like, we wanted to do this with the movie, but the studio are like, you know what, audiences, they're just not going to react well to that. Like, they're not going to understand it. This was Nolan, like, Inception was a film where he respected us as an audience and decided that let us not make a movie, let us not dumb it down or water it down and make a film that could potentially be high concept, but for the sake of an audience and for better numbers at the box office, I'll kind of, make it simpler. No, he was like, I trust my audience can figure shit out. And even if they can't, we're still all debating whether or not Dom made it out with the sort of with this thing. Did it stop spinning or not? We are still debating to this day. And audiences were the better for it, because the thing is that I have yet to hear a complaint about, oh my god, the film is far too confusing. I didn't make any sense to me. I didn't like the movie. No, people just walked out of the cinema and they were wowed. And again, this movie, I would say, was a culmination in many aspects of things that he had already been cooking. Like, for example, set pieces. The movie was one set piece after another, and all of these really, really cool ones, man. Like mind bending stuff. Really amazing. Great cast, cool. I mean, kind of, it really borrows from that French movie. What was it called? It'll come to me at some point. It'll just pop up here. But he really does that. And again, I think that this, and I know that it was in contention for me with Tenet, uh, but I think that sort of for your average audience, the average audience, I think that sort of Inception wins out, even though I'll tell you why I feel Tenet is better. But that's Inception at number four, Dunkirk at number three. Dunkirk works for me more than Oppenheimer, and the reason why I'm even sort of bunching them together is because, again, while both deal with the same era, that is, of course, World War II. One is a war movie, the other is more of a drama slash thriller. The reason why Dunkirk works is this is an example of Nolan taking what he had learned sort of in outer space amongst superheroes and applying it to this hot, tense war film that, while many felt couldn't engage on a human level, I don't think that that was the purpose of the movie at all. Because the thing is that, you know, you are dealing with a cast of characters that are, hard to keep track of, understandable. You're also having to keep track of this timeline that keeps on weaving in and out um, of sort of each other, one another. But in trying to convey, to communicate this maddening almost weight on the beach of Dunkirk to be evacuated, I think that he did a fantastic job. And I think that was, I think, the entire purpose of that movie. We were meant to understand that not only was this a one in a million shot, like sort of like, Churchill calling upon anyone with a boat, anything that could float, to be honest, to go out and evacuate these hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers, the British, but then also the French and so many others. And the desperation that was involved in that, being harried by the Germans right to the very shores of, the beaches of Dunkirk. I think that that is where the movie triumphs, and that is where the movie really, really is effective. Of course, technically very sound. Um, and while I will admit it doesn't have memorable performances, because I think as you barely get like enough screen time with any of the actors, whether it's Mark Rylance or Kenneth Branagh or even Tom Hardy. There is that fantastic Tom Hardy scene where, as a pilot in the RAF, he's in a Spitfire and his friend calls out to him. He's like, "Oh my God, he's on me." He's like, "I'm on him." What a great line. I mean, it's terse. It's very British, clipped in its nature. But I think that that's where, I think, for me at least, I felt something about the movie that I didn't with, say, for example, a film like Oppenheimer. It was just this connection that was achieved. And yeah, I really thought that sort of, again, as a combination of all of the things he had learned in the past, he kind of brought it here. And that's where I put Dunkirk at number three. Now, at number two, I know you guys are going to be pissed off with this, but I don't care. This is my list. We have Tenet. I love Tenet. I've seen it so many times, and it gets such a bad rap for all the wrong reasons. One, circumstances were against the movie because, again, this movie was supposed to release in 2020. Of course, COVID hit. Nobody was going to the cinema. There were no cinemas. I mean, even though I got to see it here in the cinema, um, I actually have a video of my experience in which it was like, what, 10 people in a cinema of 200 because they had deliberately like blocked off like one row per person. It was fantastic. It was a great experience. But everyone else, in the rest of the world wasn't able to watch that movie properly in the cinema. And while I think studios were hoping, they were pinning their hopes on this movie that somehow or the other it would sort of rescue cinema for that 2 years until Top Gun Maverick. It couldn't do that because you can't. I mean, circumstances were such. And then when you are like, sort of getting audiences to try and watch that movie on their laptops at home, they're going to be like, wait a second, man, this isn't really working for us. I can see that. I can see people watching movies at home with the attention spans of a gnat being like, no, this is maybe perhaps taking a concept like Inception too far. Not, of course, the same concept, but at least expecting or demanding of the audience their focus, their attention. Um, and that's where I think that the movie failed. Not in my books, of course, but sort of failed. It didn't fail necessarily commercially, but I mean, sort of both in sort of both regards, critically and commercially, it didn't do as well as his other films. But that didn't stop the movie from being, at least to my mind, a superior movie to Inception. Again, another culmination for him in taking a lot of the stuff that he's learned along the way and applying it to this film. Because again, here we have this riff on the spy thriller, in which you're taking a James Bond type protagonist and thrusting him into this Cold War that is being fought with the future. I mean, the concept in itself was amazing. And even though I found a lot of people, you know, griping about how it didn't make sense to them, it doesn't have to make sense to you. Everything doesn't have to make, sort of fit into these boxes and sort of have to, it doesn't have to do that. I think that that sort of, again, denies the filmmaker their sort of poetic license. A lot of people had a problem with John David Washington, who I really liked in the role. I don't know why. I mean, I think it was a great decision on his part, on Nolan's part, to give this role to him. Because while I don't think anyone had actually put two and two together at the time that this guy is Denzel Washington's son, I don't know why they felt that, this is a role that could have been given to someone far more seasoned. I liked it. I don't care what people say. It has it has in fact the best set pieces that we've seen so far from Nolan, right? First of all, of course, the very concept of everything having this reverse entropy, right? And sort of dealing with everything in reverse. That was one. But then sort of applying it, first of all, of course, in your, what's it called? The freeway motorway scene, number one, and then applying it to the battle scene at the end. I mean, come on, right? Here he's nailed the sound design. Here he's gotten a very good cast. I absolutely hated Robert Pattinson before watching this movie, and I loved him in this, right? Uh, we see again his friend, the non-linear narrative, popping up again, and in this movie making perfect sense. Perfect sense because it was so apropos. It was ideal. So, if you want to regard a filmmaker in terms of somebody who is constantly working, that Japanese concept of kaizen, where you're constantly, continuous improvement, you know, I think that Tenet, um, before, of course, Tenet, for a man who has largely done science fiction, for him at least, it is sort of his objecta, his crowning achievement in that he's poured everything that he knows into delivering this one movie. And yeah, he delivers a fantastic film. Of course. And this is where I feel that while very early in his career, it was only his fifth movie, I believe. If I am to remember Nolan for anything, let us torch all of the others. It is the prestige that for me stands out as this man's signature film. I just spoke about how sort of like, a filmmaker through the years and their work, through their filmography, is constantly working on kind of improving a concept, a theme, a skill, revising it, improving it, perfecting it. But I think that sort of he peaked very early with the Prestige. That the Prestige was an example of everything we were to expect from this man, but then everything that he had already perfected and was going to perhaps present to us in different forms, but he had already achieved in a film like The Prestige. I think, even though, of course, it is based on a book by, I believe, what is it called? Christopher Priest. Him and Jonathan Nolan writing this script about turn of the century Victorian magicians trying to best one another in this game of one-upmanship that eventually does turn deadly and then borders on it goes from fact into science fiction. I mean, everything about this movie from the actors, of course, Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman, what's it called, David Bowie. Of course, not a great female character or characters with Scarlett Johansson and Rebecca Hall, right? Michael Caine, we have him too. While not like he can't write women, he's not great at writing women, but they're clearly not. Uh, the main stage, they're not like what's it called, the performers in this movie. The performers are, of course, our leads are the two men who essentially ambitious, curious, um, and willing to strive, are locked in this unfortunate sort of folie à deux, if you will, this sort of rivalry that does neither any good. But it's just, I remember, I think this was like on watching it in my fifth or sixth or even seventh time, I don't know, when you get to the finale of this film, the music, the score starts playing, right? And it is this like sort of deep, sort of brooding, almost hum, and it constantly builds because, of course, we are building to a finale, we are building to the reveal, you know? It was at that moment, and I think I can remember it is when, for example, I think Michael Caine's character delivers the machine to that sort of abandoned theater. I think the last like 15, 20 minutes of the movie. I think it's then when I realized that this is a movie that is just so in lockstep with the mood and the emotion of what it is trying to tell that while you're sort of being taken on the last like sort of 10 minutes of this journey, you're still scratching your head and wondering, wait a second, where are we going? What is going on? How is this all making any sense? And while that has been a criticism of some of his films, that he kind of tends to leave movies somewhat open ended, you're left scratching your head. I think that a movie like The Prestige, while answers all of the questions we may have posed throughout the movie, leaves you to further think and carry away a sort of message of sort of like, to what extent do you sort of take your ambition? And while I'm, of course, speaking largely about the themes and the tropes of the movie, the filmmaking and this sort of sense of wonder that he attaches to a lot of the scenes in the movie is just something that, again, exemplifies how he is using. Because, I mean, like, with something like The Odyssey, he's kind of insistent, like, he shot the entire movie on IMAX, right? He kind of understands cinema and understands how scenes, when presented on this sort of big screen, are kind of allowing us to transport ourselves, like the transported man. And I know that I might sound a little rambling right now, but you know that scene where there's Hugh Jackman and the assistant played by Andy Serkis, and they're sort of, it's this open sort of field covered in snow. And he puts the bulb in and it all lights up. And just as the theme of this movie is dealing with, again, passing on from the industrial revolution to this age of wonder, the electric world, that too is something that he really communicates in the movie, where we are constantly like sort of wowed, even though here we are in sort of in the information AI age. But even then, I mean, sort of looking at these things, looking at the machine that Tesla creates, looking at sort of all of these little wonders, it still amazes. And I was wowed by the movie then. I am still wowed by it, having seen it recently for the, I don't know, 50th time or whatever. It's just such a fine film. And again, for me at least, the best of what Nolan is and has done. Um, I won't say of what will be, because again, I hope this man has a very long career and we get to see a lot more from him. But for me, at least, if we do sort of, have to speak about him, then for me, at least, it starts and stops with the prestige.